Buying Bitcoin can be difficult at first, but it becomes much easier over time. Your second Bitcoin, your third, fourth, fifth Bitcoin is easier than your first, at least in my mind, if you're doing it right. Now, I want to explain why that is and why it makes sense to start sooner rather than later. Some people will say this is a bit controversial as well, but I think you can do this. I think you can actually get your second Bitcoin faster than your first Bitcoin if you watch this video very closely until the end. If you don't mind, hit subscribe, turn on the bell notification underneath the video so you can see future videos just like this. There's also going to be a link to Margex underneath the video in case you want to start trading cryptocurrency, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of the video. You can use the link underneath the video to Margex. Also, if you want to just buy Bitcoin and you don't want a KYC, you don't want everyone to know exactly who you are because your Bitcoin is going to be worth a lot one day, you can join CoinW. There's a link to this underneath the video where you can buy Bitcoin. You can withdraw to cold storage as well and just stack for the long term. Now, a lot of people want to get to one full Bitcoin. That's kind of a massive goal in the cryptocurrency space. Now, in the past, that wasn't the goal. The goal was maybe 10 Bitcoin, right? When Bitcoin's only a few $1,000s, sure, some people were going for one, but a lot of people wanted like a car's worth, a decent like Camry new car worth of Bitcoin, $30,000, which would be 10 Bitcoin. Now, that goal has moved down to 1 Bitcoin. In the future, I think the goal will be like 0.5 Bitcoin, 0.25 Bitcoin, 0.1 Bitcoin. And it's becoming harder for a lot of people to get 1 Bitcoin because a lot of people just never start, right? You never start buying. You watch it and you think, oh, I'll buy it when it goes lower. And then when it goes lower, people are like, no, I was right not to ever buy that because that is garbage. It's going to keep on falling down. Then they never buy during the bear market. And then it moves up to 5 times the price during the next bull market or 10 times the price. And a lot of people see this and they think, wow, it's just always harder and harder to buy Bitcoin. And that's true if you never start. But I think after you start buying Bitcoin, after you get to your first Bitcoin, it's actually easier to buy your second and your third. And I'll explain why that is. But right now, there are about 1 million wallet addresses that hold 1 Bitcoin or more. Now, a lot of people have multiple wallets set up. So if someone holds 100 Bitcoin, they might have 5 or 10 wallets to kind of spread out some of that risk. I think that's smart, by the way, but that means that there are probably only 250,000 to 500,000 people that actually hold a full Bitcoin. And I've talked about how that's going to be very difficult to get your hands on a full Bitcoin in the future, especially when you consider the income ranges of a lot of people, right? Like just looking at this. This is in America. About 10% people make under $15,000. About 9% more make between 15 and 25,000. Let's just go over to 50 to 75,000, right? About 16.5% of people make somewhere in this range. And then, yeah, you can see the numbers. Only about 10% of people make over 200K. When you consider the cost of 1 Bitcoin being $64,000 right now, even someone making 200K in a year can't really afford a full Bitcoin, even if they were saving a lot of money, right? You make 200, maybe you pay 40, 50 grand towards taxes. You have expenses that come up, lifestyle inflation. But when you start buying Bitcoin, you can have this Bitcoin snowball, right? And I'll explain this a little bit more, why it becomes easier after you start buying Bitcoin. But let's just look at how difficult it is for people to buy a full Bitcoin if they try to buy it all at one time. That's not what I want. Let's go here, and then let's go here. Okay, so let's say your household income's $20,000. I think most people won't be able to save much, if anything, at that point. A lot of people might actually be living in debt, but let's say you could invest $1,000 if you made $40,000 income. You can maybe save 8% of that or invest 8%, so you have 3,000 left over. If you make 80K as a family, maybe you can invest 15%. And I realize it depends on your own situation, but maybe you make 120 grand between you and your partner or just yourself. and you can invest 20%. If you make 200K, maybe you can invest, 30%. And then maybe you're a doctor, you make 400K a year as a family, or you're a business person, maybe you save 40%. Not accounting for taxes. But that means that you have varying levels of wealth that you can invest. So let's say you invest 33% of this over to Bitcoin. The rest, maybe you put in index funds or real estate, whatever. That means that someone that's saving $1,000 a year can put $330 towards Bitcoin. Someone that's saving or investing $12,000 a year could invest about $4,000. If you're a big baller, doctor, or business person, maybe you can invest $53,000 towards Bitcoin. Well, in all these scenarios, you still can't buy a full Bitcoin right now, right? In a full year, you might only buy 0.01 Bitcoin, 0.06, 0.81. Now, I'm not saying that it's not worth buying at that point, but I'm saying you're not going to get to whole coiner status in a year. A lot of people think that you can just buy it in one clip, or if you can't buy it in one clip, if you can't buy it at one time, that's not worth buying. I'm here to tell you, no, you should dollar cost average. And the other day, I talked about how I'm pausing my dollar cost averaging for this bull run because I bought a lot during the bear market. But if you don't have any allocation towards Bitcoin, right, if you still need to build up your Bitcoin stack, I still think it's worth it because it becomes much easier after you get to 0.5 Bitcoin to get to the next 0.5 Bitcoin. After you get to 1 Bitcoin, it's much easier to get to the next Bitcoin. Now, the problem is the cost of Bitcoin usually goes up, right? That is one of the major things that's different. Like most people say your first million is much harder than your next million, right? And that's just because, you're usually in a higher paying job. You usually have inflation, which makes it easier to hit your second million versus your first million. There are a lot of different reasons why it's easier to do that. But this is an asset that goes up in value. For a lot of people that don't actually end up buying Bitcoin, it can be harder and harder to buy. But if you dollar cost average, right, it might be actually easier. And of course, this isn't for everyone. It's not always easier. But if you get to 1 Bitcoin, you probably have a high paying job. Unless you bought years and years ago, right, at a really good time when maybe Bitcoin was $3,000, $5,000, you probably have a good paying job. So getting to your second Bitcoin might be easier than getting to your first Bitcoin because you just have a higher income. You also might put a higher allocation towards Bitcoin. So instead of 33% after getting to 1 Bitcoin, you might be like, hey, this is the best asset on earth. You do more research, you realize I should be putting maybe 50%, maybe 60% towards Bitcoin. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that, but a lot of people do that. Another thing is you probably already paid off bad debt at that point, right? If you have a full Bitcoin or you have half a Bitcoin, whatever, you probably have already paid off maybe some high interest debt, which makes it easier to get the next bit of Bitcoin because you don't have as high expenses. You also just know how to buy Bitcoin. It sounds crazy, but before you start buying Bitcoin or buying crypto, like there's just that hurdle where you don't have a Coinbase account set up. You hear all this stuff about Bitcoin that freaks you out. You don't know exactly how to withdraw to cold storage wallets. After you've gotten some Bitcoin, you already know how to do all that. So there's not the hurdle. You understand it. You buy it systematically. Typically, it's much easier. Also, if you've already bought some Bitcoin, well, you're probably more patient. You're probably much more patient than a new investor that doesn't want to miss out, right? You're not going and buying Bitcoin at all-time highs or buying when there's some big piece of news and it goes up 20% in a day. Maybe you are. Maybe you're just dollar cost averaging. But a lot of people that have been in crypto for a while play the cycles, right? You don't buy when we're 3x higher than the previous all-time high. You don't buy when everyone is asking about crypto. You just wait. You're patient. You understand that we will have some dip in the future, and that's when you allocate or you reallocate. You buy heavier, right? I'm not telling you not to buy now. If you need allocation to Bitcoin, I think it's always a decent idea to add a little bit to your portfolio if you have none right now. But what I'm saying is you don't want to be buying when Bitcoin's 3 times this price, 4 times this price, most likely, unless, again, you don't have any allocation and you just want some. And even then, I would say don't build out your entire position at one time, right? When we're up 3 or 4x from the prior all-time high, probably not the best time to allocate, right? So you're not making those same decisions that people make every single cycle, which is you jump in at the top as heavy as you can, or what's even more likely is you jump in a little bit and then it goes up, and then you jump in harder and then harder and harder, and you start taking out money from maybe your 401k or from other investments. Maybe you get a big bonus and you keep on buying heavier and heavier until we hit the top, and then we fall, and then you have no money, right? So you're not making those mistakes. You're patient. You're patiently waiting for the best time to buy. You also know cheaper ways of buying Bitcoin. So a lot of people, when they first get into Bitcoin, they'll just buy it however is easiest. But a lot of people spend a lot of money on spreads. A lot of people actually pay a lot towards fees. But after you've been in the game long enough, you start paying attention to that, and you find lower cost ways, which is just a small portion of your, it just increases your Bitcoin stack slightly, maybe 1% or 2, but it is important, right? It is important to lower those fees. Also, you're probably not doing super risky stuff with your Bitcoin stack, right? Like, I think we've all been there where we put our crypto on some place now that we would not touch with a 10-foot pole. So you're not making those same mistakes. You're hopefully keeping all your crypto very safe. Now, maybe at that point though, when you've already had a Bitcoin or half a Bitcoin and you've been in the game for a little while, you can make intelligent decisions and kind of pick your spots where you do want to go a little bit more risk on. Maybe there is some cryptocurrency that's very small in market cap that you want to invest in. Maybe there is some long position that you want to open. You realize, hey, we're right at support. I can put in 1% of my portfolio here on 3x, 5x, 10x, something like that, and I can probably make a decent amount of money from it. I'm not saying to do that, but if you do want to do that, there is a link to Margex underneath the video, and to CoinW. You can leverage trade on those platforms, but after you've been around longer, you're more comfortable and I think much smarter about using leverage and using those high potential cryptos to amplify your returns, and then move it back into Bitcoin to hold for the long term. Of course, though, you have to realize those risks, right? You have to understand those risks. But a lot of people, again, just wrapping it up, a lot of people say it's much harder to buy Bitcoin than it was several years ago, right? And it's true, right? It's going to become much harder in the future as well to buy Bitcoin if you haven't bought any. Bitcoin at $300,000, it's going to be near impossible for 99% of the population to buy a full Bitcoin. But if you already have one Bitcoin now, I still think it can be much easier to get to that second Bitcoin, third Bitcoin. Now, that's not always going to be the case. When the price goes up exponentially, it becomes infinitely harder. But at this point, with us trending sideways for a while, with you probably having a high income, if you already have one full Bitcoin, with you getting through some of those hurdles, I think you can still stack pretty well. And it might actually be faster. It's kind of like a debt snowball, right? It gets faster and faster and faster. And you're much more focused than you were in the past, most likely. You understand Bitcoin a lot more. You are willing to put more into Bitcoin. That's something that's big too, right? Just having that confidence in buying Bitcoin and buying more Bitcoin over time. I know some people that started buying Bitcoin 10 years ago, literally 10 years ago, and they started buying a small amount, but as time went on, as they understood Bitcoin more, they bought heavier and heavier, and they were actually able to amplify their stack of Bitcoin significantly, even though the price continued to move up. I know some people that have actually put everything into Bitcoin as well. I'm not telling you to do that, but I do think there's a world where you can stack faster after you get to one Bitcoin. Again, though, that will change when we move up exponentially. Let me know your thoughts, though, on this underneath the video. Let me know if you think it's easier to get to 2 Bitcoin after 1 Bitcoin, or if you think the price component of it plays too much of a role, where, yeah, it might take you 4 years to build up an entire Bitcoin, And then 4 years from now, the price of Bitcoin is much higher. So I can totally understand too, depending on the situation, that it is actually harder, even if you have a high paying job. This might be your last chance to buy one full Bitcoin. So let me know your thoughts on this underneath the video. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. I will see you in the next one.